Alright, so under the trees, I'm going to zoom in a bit here, treetops I should say. So some of these, you can see what I'm doing purposely is I'm desaturating the colors that are getting bloomed and, blown out with that white light behind it. And I'm going in and, being intentionally, very brushy, and you can see even some texture from the paper behind it. I'm painting in, holes that the light is coming through. And I'm coming in with, either just a plain palette knife or I like to use right here, the blending marker, and I'll set that to a low brush and I'll kind of brush in white on top of it. So let me go through some of that. I'm going to go up highest in the layer. So color picking white right off the bat allows me to obliterate anything if I need to, hit undo. But a lot of times what I do is I will pick a color. Actually, I'm going to pick like this bluish green, and I might come in and brush in the shape of what I'm seeing. Or a lot of times like these here, you can make them up. You don't need to get into every single brush stroke of the of the tree or the what's actually there. As long as it reads correctly and no one's questioning that it's a branch or a bunch of leaves, no one's going to know that it's right or wrong. So I look out to reference, or I'll look to my photography as inspiration as to where the large masses of trees are. So these trees are now correct with my interpretation of where they fall within the composition. But and if I do see a branch stick way out over into here, of course I'll indicate that. But a lot of times I'm just making this stuff up. I'm not getting caught up in the details of what's actually happening out there. It's not that important to me, and again, as I mentioned, that's something I might have done many years ago, early in my career, but now I'm fine with just representing the type of foliage that's there and going back and forth. So what I'll do, in some of these areas that I just put that in, is I'll put down my brush strokes, I'll color pick white, and I'll come in and I'll just lightly start brushing over top of that, and that'll indicate like those branches are blooming out a bit. I don't need to see a real strong contrast in that branch. And as I drag this white over top of it very lightly, you'll see that I start to push, that really noticeable, stroke that I put down to the branch will start to fade. And, areas I want to clean up like this, I might come in and brush along that edge. This was early when I was just kind of roughing things in. But as I do start to get to my cleanup phase, I'll start to clean up some of these smudges, some of these areas. The nice thing about this blending marker is it's pressure sensitive. So a very, very light stroke gives me a thin line, and a very heavy stroke gives me a thick line. And then I get both. If I alter my pressure sensitivity, I can go from a thin to a thick, back to a thin. So that comes in handy when doing branches and when doing this kind of work. So I just color picked white, and it also blends. So that's a nice thing too, is it's smearing the color as I'm putting the color down, and I really like that about that brush. So here's an example where I'm going to color pick, and I'm going to start in some of these white holes where the light is leaking through. I'll come in and I'll start to indicate some of those holes, and it'll be a combination of pure sky coming through combined with translucency of the leaves and what they do to the scattering the light. So I'll mix those up, I'll look at it, I'll squint my eyes, I'm thinking about what the foliage is doing in reality, and do I have enough light showing through? Is it solid all over the place? Do I want to have just light leak in on the edges? And so I'll put these down, and I usually do go pretty quick like I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of thinking and planning. And because this is on a layer, if I don't like it, it's on a layer, I can come instantly over here to my eraser and just make my brush smaller. And I can erase it out, or I can fade it down, because that's a nice thing too. If you get like a real strong brush stroke right like that, or I want to fade in a little bit of, on the edges, I can use my eraser to help that, because I'm just erasing out the layer. And then I'm going to come over here, go back to my blending brush, color pick some white, increase my brush size, and I'm going to knock this branch back a bit so that it's not so solid in color, or at least in value is what I really mean. And these ones are really important that you zoom in and out a lot and take a look at, because this stuff, I'm so far zoomed in now, you could really get caught up in the details of overthinking it. And you know, I could spend all day just right in here if I zoomed in this close. And you don't want to do that. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to focus the viewer's eye to certain areas. You don't need to, you know, wow them with, hey, look, I draw the most realistic branches ever. You know, for some people that's their style, and that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I truly do believe that, you know, art history has shown, and, you know, art studies and all the lessons you go through and learning from the masters, that, you know, there's a right and wrong way to directing the eye and not putting so much detail all over the place, because then really there's no focus. So I'll come into this close only because I want to make accurate brush strokes, not because I want to get caught up in details. But then I'll zoom back and I'll take a look at it, and I can see that right now, you know, I'm happy with what's going on, but I'm missing a bunch of these droopy parts that are coming off the leaves, and I'm also a little bit too blue. So in this case, you know, now that I've already put down some of the blue, which is the light bleeding around those edges, I'll come in with a green and, you know, maybe a bigger brush, and I'll start to work in some of the actual green back into the blue, and you know, it's a push-pull relationship of how much is there. And as you can see, I even went in some areas and there's purples and that, and that's just how my eye is seeing color and light. And then one last trick I'll do, or one other trick I should say, is I will go in at times with an airbrush if I find that I'm really getting edges that are reading too solid. I'll come in and start to airbrush those back, and that'll help soften things. I'm very careful with that though, because, you know, I like the textured rough look. I don't want to have a soft airbrushy look to my paintings. So by me doing that is just one step of fading that white sky and light into the details, but not worrying about, you know, it having that soft airbrushy feel. It's a mechanism to do, you know, to push things back in space. And I'll show you that here. I'm going to airbrush, and I'm going to come over to big and subtle. I'm going to pick white, scale my brush down, and I'm on a layer. So just by me coming in with white, knocks those back. And again, this is something you really want to zoom back and maybe even hit and take a look at. Come in and be like, yeah, I got a little bit too much value in paint right in there. Let me zoom back, take a look at how that reads. So now it's not standing out so much. And I'll look for areas that are catching my eye. And a lot of these areas I've already taken care of and hit that. So if you come over here, I'm going to work on this last area, and we'll call this one a lesson or a chapter. So I'm going to come in and go back to my roller brush, and because I'm on a layer, I'm going to start thinking about, these were real quick paint strokes, but that I put to lay down the shape of the tree. I'm going to come in, and this is where that texture and value comes. You know, I'm coming in and I'm starting to look out at the tree. I'm realizing that, you know, there's a lot of green and blues in these areas, and I'll start laying down these strokes, and you can see the textured paper coming through, and depending on how much value. I'm even here going to color pick some of this green that has a little bit more warmth, yellow to it, a little brown. Try that through here. Let me color pick that up. There we go. So I'll mix, go back and forth between my values, and it's literally, it's nothing more than what I'm doing right now. It's picking, it's throwing down, it's scumbling, you know, in color and value. It's trying to be true to the shape and forms that I see in front of me, and it's working that in. And then lastly, I'll come in and I'll grab the white and I'll start erasing out areas to let the tree come through. And then if I really want thick paint, I'll switch over here to my palette knife. Now again, again, this was a modified palette knife that I've gone in and added loading, and manually I'll slide this back and forth depending on how much loading I want. I'm going to color pick this green here, and as you see here, if I really start to push down and work it back and forth, I can start to get some real thick appearance of paint. And again, that's all stylistic as to how much I leave and erase out or add. But this is a directional brush, as mentioned before, so I do get cool looking strokes depending on how I rotate my hand and wrist. These trees here I'm going to leave desaturated because I'm starting to get further in the distance, so that's a stylistic. Well, I mean, it's really how the world works. It's called atmospheric haze or perspective, and objects farther away from the camera will desaturate, when mixed with the particulates in the air and the way the sun interacts, etc. So I'm going to leave these more desaturated. I might have little hints of color, but I don't want them to compete with the foreground. I want to keep all of my contrast to the foreground. I want to keep all my saturation to the foreground. So I will work across these three. I will zoom in, I will zoom out. I'll pay attention to shadow areas after I've gone in and started to get some tree shape forms, and I'll start to think about where these shadows are falling, what side of the tree, what's the pattern and shape they're doing. I'll think about where my darks will be, and then lastly will be the highlights. And essentially that's it for now. We're at the 11-minute mark. I want to wrap this up and we'll move on to the next section. So that's where we're at right now. Thanks for your time.